They say a man's name is his legacy, but what if your name is the thing that breaks you? What if it don't open doors, but shuts them in your face? What if your name is the reason your daddy never came home? This is Mark Joie, and you're watching Injustice Browning. If this story moves you, if you feel it in your chest like I did, subscribe, leave a comment. These stories deserve to breathe. Reuben Carter Jr. stood over the grave like the wind was holding his shoulders down. 36 years old, a full-grown man, but somehow still that boy wondering why his daddy never came back. The tombstone was plain. No quote, no verse, just a name and a date. Reuben Carter, 1919 to 1990. That name, it should have meant something more. Reuben Carter Sr. had come home from the war with honor, fought in France, stitched up his brothers on the field, wore that uniform with the pride they said he wasn't allowed to have. But none of it mattered in the Deep South. Not the medals, not the oath, not the blood spilled overseas. Back in Tallahatchie County, Mississippi, a black man's pride was dangerous. A black man in a pressed uniform, that was a target. At one wrong look, one wrong whisper, that's all it took. Reuben Jr. never saw what happened that night in 1947. He wasn't born yet, but he heard the stories in fragments passed down, like broken glass, and now, standing in front of that grave, he tried to piece it all together. The sheriff came after sunset. No warrant, no explanation, just headlights, dust, and white men with quiet mouths and loud eyes. Reuben Sr. had just sat down to eat. Fried okra, beans, cornbread. His wife Alma was 6 months pregnant. Their baby girl, Lily, barely 2. The knock wasn't a knock, it was a command. They said a white girl from town had been bothered. That's all it took. No name, no time, no proof. Just the color of Reuben's skin and the threat of his presence. He didn't run, didn't even raise his voice, just stood up slow, hands out, told Alma to keep Lily back, but she followed him out anyway, barefoot and crying. They dragged him across the porch like a dog. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, pretending they didn't. Alma begged them not to take him. One of the men told her to hush before she ended up in the same cell. Nobody ever saw him walk free again. No trial that made sense. No jury that looked like him. The judge didn't even let Reuben speak. Called him boy right there in court. Said the town couldn't afford to wait on the truth. The jury nodded, like they were just checking a box. Reuben Carter Sr. was sentenced to life in under 3 hours. That night split their family clean in two. One side lived in silence, the other behind bars. And now, years later, his son stood over the dirt, carrying the same name, wondering if it had cursed him too, because a name should carry history, love, honor. But in America, some names just carry weight, heavy weight. And if you're black, sometimes that weight is too much to carry alone. That grave didn't say innocent. It didn't say father, didn't say veteran, just Reuben Carter. And for the son standing there, it felt like the dirt was still fresh. That's how this story begins. Not with glory, not with war, not with justice, but with a name, a stolen life, and a boy searching for what was lost. Alma Carter never buried her husband, but she mourned him just the same. After the courthouse slammed its doors, after the cell locked behind him, and the last newspaper stopped printing his name, Alma went back to the house alone. Same porch, same walls, but it didn't feel like a home anymore, just wood and echoes. She didn't cry much in front of the kids. She couldn't afford to. Tears were a luxury, food was the priority, rent was due. And white folks don't wait for your grief to pass before they come collect. She ironed shirts for men who wouldn't speak to her in the store, washed linens for women who asked her to use the back door. She did what she had to, laundry, floors, sewing, cooking. Dignity didn't come from the job, it came from how she carried herself through it. And Alma carried herself like someone who knew the world owed her nothing, but would still take whatever was hers to give. Little Reuben didn't understand it all at first. He just knew Mama worked hard, harder than anybody, and sometimes at night, she would sit real still in her rocking chair, staring out the window with hands folded like prayer, except her lips didn't move. The house would be quiet then, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. He'd ask about Daddy sometimes. Alma would pause, then say the same thing every time. Your daddy was a good man. That's all you need to know. And that was the end of it for a while. Mississippi was no place for a black boy to wander without knowing the rules, and Alma made sure her son learned them early. Eyes low, Speak soft. Smile when they look at you. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. Always. But even a good boy could feel the walls. Reuben remembered the day it hit him, 3rd grade. His teacher, a white woman with a soft voice and cold eyes, handed him back a math test, barely looked at it. You colored boys ain't college material, she said, just loud enough for him to hear, but soft enough to keep it invisible. That sentence didn't come with fists. It didn't need to. It did the work. He went home that day, quiet, quieter than usual, didn't touch his supper, just stared at his plate. Alma watched him for a while before she spoke. What they tell you? She asked. He shrugged. Nothing. She nodded, like she'd heard that answer before, like it was a language only black mothers understand. That night, she pulled down an old showbox from the closet. Inside, yellowed, newspaper clippings, army patches, a torn Bible, and a photograph, Reuben Sr. in uniform, standing proud beside a tank, not smiling, but not afraid either. Your daddy fought for this country, she said, and they still dragged him like a dog. She paused. So no, baby, respect won't always save you, but you keep yours anyway, 'cause once you let go of that, they got you. Reuben stared at the photo. His daddy looked strong in a way he didn't feel yet, but something stirred in his chest that night. Not anger, not yet, just a small, sharp knowing that the world saw him before he even opened his mouth. The next morning, Alma gave him his lunch pail, kissed his forehead, and said, make him remember your name, but don't let him steal your soul trying. There were no protests, no marches in their town, no newspaper editorials screaming injustice, just a mother and her children surviving quietly, every single day, because survival was a kind of resistance, too, especially when the world didn't expect you to make it. By the time Reuben turned 12, he had already seen what poverty does to pride, what hunger does to joy, but Alma never let it break them. She cooked with love. She prayed with power. She kept the lights on even when the money said otherwise. And she never let bitterness rot her spirit. She didn't raise him to be angry. She raised him to be ready. Reuben would grow up with scars he didn't ask for and questions that had no easy answers. But in the silence of that little wooden house, under a leaky tin roof, he learned something they never taught at school. He learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it bleeds in the laundry water and dries on cracked hands. Sometimes it's a black mother raising a son in a world that took her husband and telling that boy he still matters, even when everything around him says otherwise. It started with a slip of the tongue. Reuben was 17, sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a used textbook, scribbling down notes about the Bill of Rights, words that felt more like fairy tales than law. Alma was tired that night, real tired. Her hands were red from scrubbing, back aching from bending all day, and maybe, just maybe, her guard dropped for half a second. You got that from your daddy, she said, half smiling. Always had a mind for the truth. Reuben looked up. You mean had? Alma froze. She didn't answer. The room went still, like it knew something was about to break, and in that moment, he saw it. The lie, all those years, the silence, the missing pieces. Daddy wasn't dead. He'd been breathing all this time just behind concrete and steel, behind shame and survival. She tried to explain, said she kept it quiet so he wouldn't grow up bitter, so he could have a shot at childhood. Said she didn't want him carrying a weight that wasn't his, but it was his. It had always been his. That night, Reuben didn't sleep. He just stared at the ceiling, fist clenched, questions clawing at his chest. Why didn't anybody fight for him? Why did they let it happen? Why was he still in there? By morning, the questions had become a mission. Reuben started digging. He walked to the county courthouse every afternoon after school, sometimes skipping dinner just to sit in the back room of the clerk's office, flipping through yellowed folders and brittle files. The paper smelled like mold and dust, like the justice system had been rotting for years. His daddy's case file was thick to thick for something that was supposedly open and shut. First thing he saw was the jury list. 12 names, all white. Not a single black soul allowed in the box, and this was in Tallahatchie County, where half the town was black. The court-appointed lawyer, drunk at the hearing, didn't file a single objection, called Reuben Sr. my boy in open court. Then he found the real poison, buried at the bottom, in the back of a drawer to sign statements from neighbors, black neighbors. They said Reuben Sr. was home that night, eating dinner, playing, with his daughter on the porch, but those testimonies were never read in court. The sheriff had thrown them out, said they weren't reliable. That's when Reuben Jr. knew. This wasn't just his dot, this was theater. A performance, a rigged game, and the house always wins. Something lit in him after that. Not just anger but purpose. He didn't want revenge. He wanted the truth, and he knew the system wouldn't give it unless he spoke its language. So he decided to become a lawyer. Not for the paycheck, not for the title, but for his father, for his name. He filled out college applications on the same kitchen table where Alma once sewed dresses to survive. But when he mailed them off, weeks passed with no word. One school said his application got misplaced. Another never received it at all. A third finally responded, telling him he was promising but intense, and maybe he'd be better suited for community outreach. That was code. He could hear it. Too smart, too loud, too black. Even when he got accepted finally, it didn't stop. He walked into classrooms where professors called him young man instead of Mr. Carter, even when they used titles. For everyone else, students avoided his eyes. One even said, "You must be here on scholarship, right?" Reuben swallowed it, took it all in, then got back to work. He read case law until his eyes burned, slept in libraries, ate peanut butter for weeks to save money on books. But every time it got too hard, he'd pull out the photo, that one picture of his father in uniform, standing straight, full of hope. That image reminded him this fight wasn't new. It had just passed hands. He didn't want to be another statistic, another angry black man the world shrugged off. He wanted to be the one they couldn't ignore, because legacy isn't about blood. It's about what you do with the pain you inherit. And Reuben Carter Jr. was done letting theirs go unanswered. He wasn't trying to change the system for everyone, just enough to set one man free, one man who never stopped being his father, even from a cage. 42 years. That's how long it took for the truth to matter. Reuben Carter Jr. was nearly 60 by the time it happened, more gray in his beard than black, but he never let go, never stopped digging, never stopped calling, never stopped pushing past the doors that slammed in his face. Most days, people told him to let it go. It was a different time, they said. The system failed everyone back then, like justice had an expiration date. But he didn't want revenge. He didn't want apologies. He wanted a door to open, one door, with his father on the other side. It finally cracked when a civil rights firm out of New York, small team, Big Hearts, agreed to take another look. Reuben had sent them a box full of everything. The jury lists, the buried witness statements, the sloppy police reports. But it was the DNA that changed everything. New testing methods proved the crime scene evidence didn't match his father, not even close, and the timeline down to the minute put Reuben Sr. at home. It was enough to file a motion, enough to raise eyebrows, enough to scare the same men who built their careers on lies. But the courts moved like molasses. Months dragged into years. Hearings rescheduled, paperwork misplaced, and through it all, Reuben Jr. kept showing up, suited tight, tie slightly off, heart pounding. Then, one morning, it happened. A judge, tired and reluctant, signed the order, case overturned, conviction vacated. Reuben Carter Sr. was free, but freedom don't always look like you expect. When Reuben Jr. saw him, standing there in front of the gates, he almost didn't recognize him. His father was thin, skin like ash, eyes sunken and gray. The man who once stood tall in uniform now looked like the shell of someone who'd seen too many winters without sun. He didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't even say hello, just looked Reuben Jr. in the eye and said, "They killed me a long time ago." And the words landed like bricks. They drove in silence, father in the passenger seat, son behind the wheel. 42 years of stories trapped between them. Nothing came easy. Every question felt like a wound, every answer too late. Reuben brought him home anyway, back to the house where Alma still kept his picture on the mantle. She waited at the door, hands trembling. She hadn't seen him since the night they took him. She just whispered, "You're home now." But it wasn't home anymore. Not really. He didn't eat much, didn't sleep much, spent most days staring out the window, rocking slow in Alma's old chair. Sometimes he'd flinch at the sound of footsteps or reach for a tray that wasn't there. His body was out, but his mind, still in a cage. Reuben tried He cooked meals, told stories, showed him newspaper clippings, anything to spark a piece of who he was before. But the system hadn't just taken time, it had stolen memory, trust, warmth. They never got those years back, and they never would. Alma passed just 3 weeks later. Her heart gave out while she slept. Peacefully, they said, but Reuben knew better. She waited long enough to see her husband walk free. Then she let go. They buried her on a cloudy morning. The town showed up this time, some in silence, some in shame, and Reuben stood between the graves, his mother, gone, his father, still breathing but barely living, and he felt it in his bones. This wasn't justice. This was survival dressed in paperwork. This was freedom with no apology. No one was punished for what they did. The sheriff who buried the statements, retired on pension, the judge who sentenced his father, long dead, the lawyer who fell asleep in court, never even remembered the case. Reuben could have screamed, could have burned it all down, but instead, he stood still and he breathed, because sometimes that's all you can do. Justice came, but it came too late to fix the broken pieces, too late to restore what had already crumbled. Reuben Carter Sr. lived one more year after his release. Then one night, quietly, he slipped away in his sleep. No final speech, no victory, just silence. And when Reuben Jr. found him, he sat down beside him. No tears, just a hand on the shoulder and a whisper. "I found you, Daddy. I found you." There were no cameras at the funeral, no news vans, no speeches from senators or letters from the governor. Just folding chairs, a wooden casket, and a small stone that read, "Reuben Carter, 1919 to 2021. Finally free, Reuben Jr. stood at the head of it all, tie straight, voice steady. He didn't cry out because the grief was gone, but because the grief had taught him how to speak. He read the words his mother used to whisper when the world tried to crush them quiet. The poem she kept tucked in her Bible. The one she whispered to herself after long days bent over laundry. The one Reuben Sr. never got to hear in full, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. "I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise." And as his voice carried through the trees, the wind picked up, just a little, like maybe somebody was listening. After the burial, Reuben didn't go home. He went to the courthouse, the same courthouse that chewed up his father and spit him out forgotten. Same marble, same doors, same steps where they dragged him in cuffs, head down, mouth closed. But this time, Reuben climbed those steps in a suit, clean, calm, holding his daughter's hand. He didn't say anything right then, just looked up at the building, then down at her wide eyes, her steady grip, and he knew this was the legacy, not revenge, not bitterness. Before long, the scholarship was announced. The Reuben Carter Legal Freedom Fund, for young black students studying law, specifically those who'd been accused, profiled, silenced. It wasn't about charity, it was about fuel, fire, giving power to the next Reuben, the next Alma, the next kid watching their world split into with no warning. And Reuben told the story. He told it everywhere, in church basements, high school gyms, college classrooms, even inside prison walls, where men who looked just like his father sat on plastic chairs, listening like their lives depended on it. He didn't dress it up, didn't sugarcoat, didn't hide names. He said the judge's name, the sheriff's, the prosecutors. He spoke them out loud, not out of hate, but out of duty, because silence had already stolen too much. "They tried to bury my father," he'd say, standing under church lights that buzzed and flickered, "but they didn't know we were seeds." He told young black boys that the law wasn't written for them, but they could still write the future. He told young black girls that resilience wasn't weakness and their voices could shake walls. And every time he said the name Reuben Carter, he said it like it belonged to all of them, because it did. He still kept the old photo, the one of his father in uniform, back straight, eyes sharp. It sat on his desk now, behind a row of books and letters and court transcripts, a reminder of what was stolen and what they built anyway. Sometimes when his daughter would sit on his lap and ask about her granddaddy, he'd tell her the truth, that he was brave, that he was wrong, that he didn't come home, but he left behind something worth carrying, and she'd listen with eyes wide, just like he used to listen to Alma on stormy nights, whispering poetry to the dark. The fight didn't end with freedom. It began there, because justice without memory is hollow, and Reuben made sure they remembered. He made sure that name once spat out in courtrooms Once erased from headlines, stood tall in libraries, legal briefs, and classroom walls. Reuben Carter, not inmate, not number, not statistic, veteran. Father, wrongfully imprisoned, and finally remembered.